well, when you look at someone like Miles, stylistically, when he started in the 50s, that kind of Ivy League three-piece, like the soft shoulder, you know, the kind of wide collar. And then by the time you get to Bitches Brew, stylistically, from the fashion sense, it's just gone on a whole different wave. You know, we've got flares, tie-dye, leather patchwork. And for me, like, I think that's just as important as Miles's music. And in a way, when I sort of look at artists, when I'm working with artists, just looking at some of those greats where you kind of look through their timeline and like their style musically, but also style through clothing and threads and color and texture and textiles, you also see this like evolution, which I think is really interesting.
What do you think it is about the UK, and more specifically London, that produces so many iconic fashion designers? And how much does the rich music scene feed into this influence? I wanted to learn more, so I got to speak to the best person to speak to about this, Nicholas Daley, who has a menswear label, Nicholas Daley, to speak just about that. And Nicholas Daley is someone that is representing the past, the present, and the future of fashion, because not only does he think about how the fabric falls on your skin, but he also thinks about community, culture, and craftsmanship, and how he could be programming a festival stage with Sherelle and Code 9 one day, programming an event with Lucinda Chua and Kobe Say the next, and then winning the highest praise and awards for his designs, because he's thinking about his label not only as something that you sell in stores, but something that you can experience in life that contributes back to the culture that made him who he is today. I hope you like this one. It's really wholesome. This is Nicholas Daley Speaks Volumes, starting now. Before we get started, let me introduce you to the sponsor of the podcast, Squarespace.com, where you can be an entrepreneur, a small business owner, a creative, a photographer, a graphic designer who might want to showcase their work and connect more with your audience and customer. And let me tell you about different ways you can do that. You can do that with Squarespace's SEO and AI tools, which can optimize your website to improve every facet of it to be optimized for your audience and for discoverability. So they have AI tools where you can write little blurbs and descriptions, and you can ask the AI to write the best and most SEO appropriate descriptions so that you can be found by the audience that's looking for you. You can also enjoy their drag and drop tools with their fluid engine, which means you can just pick things up, drop them where you like, remodel and reshape, all within a safe and playful environment, which means you don't need to know anything about code at all. You can just get started, have fun. And there are so many templates as well that you can use. So go to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you are ready to go live, go to squarespace.com/volume and use the code volume to take off 10% off your first purchase of website or domain. You ready for Nicholas Daley? Let's go. I'd like to welcome you to Speaks Volumes for this episode, and we have a exciting guest for you today. Coming to us from London, it is Nicholas Daley. Before we do formal introductions, Nicholas, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me. Excited to be on the show, and seeing the other guests you've had on, you know, there's been some really nice synergy with different creatives and artists. So yeah, I'm excited to be here.
We're so excited to have you. I've been speaking to people on this podcast about whether it's creative direction or their own artistry as artists, or music supervision, or documentaries about music. And I wanted to find another perspective of an interaction with music. And you are a fashion designer, I guess a maker of clothes, if you will, but you do so much more than that. The story of your brand, where it comes from, what it's about, and how it interacts with music said to me that you do so much more. You think about what you do in so many ways, in volumes, as the podcast is about. It really felt like a nice way to begin to round out this series. I'd love for you to introduce yourself and who you are and what you do to the audience that doesn't know what you're about.
Yeah, well, I'm Nicholas Daley. So yeah, menswear designer based in London. And I've been running my brand coming up to almost 10 years, which is a bit, hitting a bit of a decade milestone. So I graduated from Central St. Martin's, which obviously has a very prestigious, long-standing alumni of John Galliano, Alexander McQueen, right through to like contemporary designers, you know, Wells Bonner, myself, Charles Jeffrey, like a whole host of British designers who have come out of that institution. So I feel like fortunate and lucky and sort of humbled that I've had like a really good like incubation within fashion, like here in London, showcasing at London Fashion Week, doing presentations in Paris Fashion Week, runway shows, collaborations with different brands. But ultimately, like, there's always like a core of it. And then I sort of created this mantra when I was on the LVMH award prize. So that's kind of like the big prize. If you're a young designer trying to get through the ranks, the LVMH prize and award is, you know, such a like great achievement. So I got through to the finals. And obviously Virgil was one of the mentors. I was really happy that he was part of my kind of year to speak to him, because straight off the bat, we didn't even talk fashion. We talked music. We were like, oh yeah,
Wow.
Youssef Dayes, Shabaka Hutchins, and yeah, like different DJs we like. So before we even got into like chatting about music, heady talk on sounds and things which we had a lot of similarity to in terms of our interests. And basically, yeah, like during that whole process, I had like 3 minutes with like the top elite of the fashion world, from Edward Enninful, Founder Winton. So I had to like, well, how do I speak my truths about me and my brand? And I was like, well, there's 3 things, which is like community, like the artists who I collaborate with, or whether that's through paintings or music or drawing or illustration, sculpture, whatever it might be, working with different people within my community, supporting my community. So we've done a lot of like charitable work, like Tomorrow's Warriors, who have been at the South Bank Centre for like 30 years. I guess the cultural part of it is like my own ancestry and like what my parents did. They're also big music lovers. They had a reggae club together called the Reggae Klub, hence the t-shirt, the Reggae Klub. So mum and dad, you know, were fans and lovers of music and wanted to do something during their time together in Scotland. And then, yeah, just I guess the cultural richness of where I'm based here in London, you know, a city which has been so important to my career and to my life. I met my wife here, I got married here, I studied here, my brand's here, a lot of the artists who I've been fortunate to work with and build the relationships are all part of this city. And then probably the last thing is like the craftsmanship, which I think is always quite interesting, because I guess what I realized, like I think I'm interested in craftsmanship, not just within a textile form, but also maybe within a sonical form. Like having Talvin Singh and Lucinda Schwa and Todd Kobise do an improv session at the South Bank Centre, and I kind of helped bring this moment together, and seeing like Talvin play tabla. He is a crafts person of tabla. He's been playing since 5. Or if I'm chatting to Shabaka, you know, he is a crafts person of wind instruments. And it's the same way that then I'd look at like a textiles mill in Scotland who've been making tartan fabrics for like over 100 years. You know, that they are crafts people. Looking at those 3 entities, the community, the culture, and the craftsmanship. And basically that's when I came out with the 3 C's. So straight away at LVMH, I was just like, wow, my branding could say 3 C's, community, craftsmanship, and culture. Like whatever I'm kind of working on, whether it's a show or a collaboration or a music festival stage, whatever it might be, I always seem to like try to reflect into those 3 cornerstones or those 3 core pillars.
You put on events, you host events, you work with artists in so many different ways, whether it's in store or in live spaces. And I feel like the curation of what you present to the world is very much as much part of the brand as the clothing itself.
I think creating a space or a moment, it's something which has to come from you, from within. Like you got to have a clear feeling or vision of what you're trying to achieve, like within, whether it's, you know, we did a festival takeover stage at Gala Festival under the Woven Rhythms banner, which is like a new entity of kind of the world of what I've built. That started off the back of the South Bank Centre of last year and just continues to just be rolling. Then also doing a takeover at the Victorian Albert Museum called Fabric and Folklore, which was in February. And again, that was like another quite 11 different things happening across the museum. So it's amazing to then, you know, have the opportunity to go in there and bring a 1950s reggae sound system and have Bradley Zero going hard on like, you know, some heavy dub plates, and then having talks about the craft of Asafa flags in Ghana and the storytelling and like the textiles would go within that. And it was one of their sort of biggest turnouts. It was over 5,000 people. attended, and I think the V&A were a bit overwhelmed when they were like, you know what though, this is the most stylish V&A late takeover we've ever had, or best good looking, or the best good looking crowd they've had. So I was like, wow, that's a win-win on all the parts. Good music, good sound, and obviously great style.
It feels very unique of a brand to be. I don't hear many menswear designers talk about their life and work in such ways, which is like so intertwined.
It can get very specific. Like, for example, we've done custom outfits for like different artists, whether it's, one example with Youssef Dayes, when he performed at the Royal Albert Hall, we made this cowrie shell bucket hat. So we hand sewed all the cowrie shells, which obviously was the first sort of known currency definitely within Africa, or even within human civilization in terms of trading. So that was a big part of, I think, why Youssef wanted to have cowrie shells. So we had a conversation together, and then we made this like amazing cowrie shell bucket hat and hand sewed all the shells on. And then it was amazing because obviously when he was drumming at the Royal Albert Hall and you just saw his like head shaking, and like when it was getting more intense, all these shells were just like responding. And obviously this was like a hand knitted bucket hat, done with our hand knitters. So it's, all handcrafted, and there's something quite beautiful about all of that coming together. And now it's like Youssef's profile picture on his Instagram, and it's great, and it's incredible to see artists and like Youssef and Shabaka and Mansour, Judah from Deviation, Alpha Miss, James Messiah, and of course my wife Nabia Iqbal. They were all part of this moment in 2018 called Red Clay, and that was kind of the moment where I abandoned the runway and just had all these musicians dressed in my clothing, which was inspired by Freddie Hubbard Red Clay in terms of like the mood and the feelings. So that was in a church in Covent Garden, and it was a beautiful setting. And they just played improv jazz for like 2 hours, just wearing, a pinstripe we created in Yorkshire with one of the mills. And we use this like really great burnt kind of amber red yarn, which is similar to the Red Clay album sleeve. So sometimes when I'm looking at like the sound, or it could be like a vinyl cover or a picture of like, say, Miles Davis, who I think is like, obviously such an incredible genius. But it's interesting as well, when you look at someone like Miles, stylistically, when he started in the 50s, that kind of Ivy League, the kind of three-piece, like the soft shoulder, the kind of wide collar. And then by the time you get to Bitches Brew, stylistically, from the fashion sense, it's just gone in a whole different wave. We've got flares, tie-dye, leather patchwork. And for me, like, I think that's just as important as Miles's music. And in a way, when I sort of look at artists, when I'm working with artists, just looking at some of those greats where you kind of look through their timeline and like their style musically, but also style through clothing and threads and color and texture and textiles, you also see this like evolution, which I think is really interesting.
I think we all look at these incredible images of iconic artists, and the clothes represent so much of the feeling because we weren't there at the time.
Yeah.
And you having that kind of full circle inspiration to creation, to seeing it on stage is quite a special role that you play. What role do you think fashion has in music?
I mean, it's always been there. I mean, I think it's a way of expression. And I guess in particular within, the Black community in particular, it's been a sense of armor as well. How you address the industries we work within, musically, politically, socially, what you wear is important. And I guess there is a sense of tribalism as well within music and fashion, and whether you're into heavy metal, or whether you're a jazz head, or whether you're alternative or whatever. So it's always been at like the forefront. And I think even when you look at, my first ever collection, when I showed it at Central St. Martin's, I had Don Letts be part of that. So he walked in the runway show, and it was amazing because I was looking at like Acme Attractions, and then when he worked at that store and having like Strummer and like, the Clash and the Sex Pistols and like, Dennis Morris, the photographer, and, Malcolm McLaren. And I just thought, it's such an interesting intersection within that point here in London within music, this kind of like, the punk heads meet the reggae, the dub and the reggae, the rebel dread, which Don has written a book, and there's, a great documentary about his life and his experience without it. And that was before I was even a brand. I was like, this is just cool shit. And Don's like amazing kind of cultural icon muse to kind of bounce off. So even at that point, before I was even selling into Saks or Nordstrom or Selfridges or whatever it might be, that was me just like, trying to find these like interesting individuals who have a way of like intersecting across, stylistically crossing over different areas. And that's kind of what I kind of hope that, like it was amazing just to be at Glastonbury, to like, to see Archie from King Cruel and like Mount Kimby, and like I love all that sound, but then head over to like West Holts and see like Steel Pulse, and then like run back over to like Block 9 and or like go to the Arrival stage to to see Manar and Ahad, and so like that was like for me, like I feel having that richness of different soundscapes is also the way in which when I design a collection, do we need a little bit more wool? Do we need to have a jacquard? Like, does it need to be like, because I always like to be quite tactile. So even with fabrics, I like to have this like mixture of this like push and pull, whether it's a woven or a jacquard or a print or a handcrafted tie dye, or, so it's like that approach is something which I like to have, where it feels quite layered and coming from different reference points.
Who do you identify perhaps as the tribe of individuals that really rock and wear and identify with your brand?
That's a tough one. I think I'm still trying to figure out that $1 million question. But I mean, I think it's great when you meet other creatives and other peers who have like Carlos Nino, saw him play with Andre, and he's like, oh, you're the designer that makes the big hats, right? And I was like, yeah, that's me. And it was like sick. Carlos Nino knows who I am, and like I love his work, and such like, him and Andre and the whole LA ambient sort of community there. I was like, that's cool. That's really cool to know being surrounded by peers or people who know of the brand, and then obviously, having these very deep personal relationships within my own life, whether it's my wife or my parents and what they did between, like music and fashion, like the t-shirt, the Reggae Klub. This is the design my dad created when he had it. And then I've just taken that family sort of heirloom merch t-shirt, and then that's continued to run. And now it's in an exhibition at the British Library called Beyond the Baseline, which is 500 years of the celebration of British black music, or the impact of British black music. And so they reached out to me because they'd heard about the story of what my parents had done with the Reggae Klub from 1978 to 82, supporting like grassroots reggae here in the UK, and in particular Scotland, like Edinburgh, Glasgow, Aberdeen.
Was that where it was based?
Yeah. So my parents met in Edinburgh, and then they started the club then. And then my dad was, he sort of built the sound system, Sligo sound system. And then there was a West African DJ called Ozzy. So he would come on and play the high life. And then my dad would come on and play all the dub and like the reggae and all the white labels, because Greensleeves would be sending stuff up to my dad. Through my sort of brand journey, that now it's like, part of the British Library's archive. And so many people have like said some really nice things, and like people who have seen the original t-shirt and images from the club and like old tickets. And I guess it's just like carrying on the flame, really, like carrying on the torch. So I just hope anyone who, whether you come to the show or come to a festival stage takeover with Woven Rhythms, or buy a Reggae Klub t-shirt, or interact with the brand, whether it's in a fashion space or within a cultural couture space, I just hope that like people can kind of get something from that, feel enriched. And everything what I try to create and do, is all about having that authentic kind of story, and also trying to celebrate soundscapes or bring people together through the power of music, as cheesy as it sounds.
It does feel like you transport people back and forward through your brand, because there's a clear reference of where you're pulling some inspiration from, but it's also a brand that is made for now. I wanted to also ask, I find it interesting, and maybe this is a very personal question because I've got a 2-year-old and he is half Chinese, half a quarter Greek, quarter Italian. And I think about him and I think about his future, and as someone that has like a mixed culture.
Yeah.
And you are half Scottish as well, which we haven't talked about yet. And I think that you blend that into your brand. And I get this sense that, because I hear a lot of kids that have a mixed race background, they don't feel like they belong to any one culture. Whereas I feel like for you, you've really embraced the fact that you have such a rich blend of cultures and made it your own.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think this is again like another big part of kind of how I've been brought up, like definitely from my parents. Like I think they've always been very much like, you know, people look at the differences versus the similarities coming from like, you know, two strong patriotic nations, you know, Scotland and Jamaica, both sides very patriotic of where they're from, historically oppressed by the English, by colonialism. You know, there's a lot of synergy there historically, and obviously there's so much Celtic and Irish blood in Jamaica. You know, after in West African indentured slaves, Irish, I guess, overseers and laborers was the second highest, like in the Caribbean. So that Celtic kind of West African Caribbean through colonialism, through the empire, you know, you only need to look at, you know, how many second names and villages and towns across Jamaica, Brownstown and Marley and Daley, and, you know, there's so many. You know, so there's so much there already. And I think that, like, even the flags, the St. Andrew's cross, they're the exact same cross. I guess for me, it's like, that's maybe a reason why I've always wanted to celebrate that multiculturalism, like within my work, the themes of different collections which I work on. Like we did a collection called Madras, which was using a lot of fabrics from Chennai, a lot of like hand-woven textiles, and like the impact of then that, how that was connecting with the empire and where it is now, and like, you know, using that particular textiles and cloth to tell stories and narratives. And then right through to Astro Black, which was looking like Afrofuturism, like Sun Ra and spiritual jazz, but then also just looking at these different groups like Don Cherry's, like, you know, with Mocha Cherry, and this whole kind of like tribal, different worlds and different like ethnicities and groups coming together. So I think for me, it's been really important for sure. And I think I've been fortunate that I've had parents who have like distilled, making sure both sides of my cultural ancestry is understood, and even down to textiles. You know, like I love making so many tams and hand knitted crocheted stuff, and a lot of that you see, you know, in Jamaica within the Rastafarian community. And across the West Indies, you'll see all these lovely, amazing hand-knitted hats and tams and beanies and vests. And then you see that hand-knitted work in Scotland. Like one of the first things my mum made my dad was a hand-knitted jumper. You know, so there's this idea of craft and like hand and DIY from both sides of my family, when, you know, you're kind of trying to find that sense of identity through music, through fashion, which I think is something I've tried to pick up on, like even in my most latest collection called Sacred Drums, where I'm looking at Jamaican folklore storytelling and Nyabingi drumming and like Count Ozzy. And then also I've still got a kilt in there and that textile, and that's our own tartan. It's a registered Nicholas Daley tartan with the tartan advisory committee. It was woven in Ireland using a mill in Ireland using Irish linen. We did the colours in like a red, green and gold, but done in like a check. So that whole kilt, or that whole look with a hand knitted vest and a beret, there's so much even within like one of my fashion looks where it's like, it brings in so many elements, just continuing to layer and layer and layer and layer all this stuff which embodies me.
I think that's so beautiful and inspiring for creative people, and inspiring for parents as well, because I always think about with my kid that I never want to feel like he doesn't belong anywhere, and that he actually represents the future, because it is that melding of cultures, and never wanted to feel like an outsider when he kind of is something special. And so it's really great to hear that. Do you feel like with the certain elements of culture that you reference, whether it's through reggae or whether it's through tartan or whatever, that there was any gatekeepers or pushback to symbols of certain culture that you're mashing up, if you will?
Pushback in the sense of like people
You
finding it hard that
you can't mix those things together. Yeah.
Not really. I mean, not nothing which I can think off the top of my head, because I just like always, I guess it's that sense of like, you know, as a creative, you need to be just quite clear and knowing the vision and what you want to say, because like it's so hard as a creative. Like not everyone's gonna like every track, not everyone's gonna like every look, not everyone's gonna like every shirt, every button. It's all down to personal opinion and taste. But I think the real thing is, obviously, I think most creatives and artists will be like, okay, like I get the vibe, the story's clear, it feels authentic, you know, it's coming from the right places. And I think that's much harder than to try to criticize. Like there's so much music and even fashion design as well. Like what aesthetically we are on way different wavelengths, but I appreciate it because like the message is clear and it feels true. So I think that's something which I feel is like been quite important to kind of understand for me. But I've been lucky enough that the collections that I've done so far and these like curatorial cultural moments, or even doing my first music festival stage, I was like, you know, let's just see what happens. And then reaching out to, you know, Code 9, Sherelle, Nabia, Mia Code and Tash LC, Alec, Errol and Wulu, and then having Abba Shanti, you know, having a sound system I've grown up on to be able to book him for my first kind of festival state takeover at Gala Festival. So it was amazing to have like Abba Shanti come in and maybe introduce people to, you know, the origins or an OG of roots dub reggae to a much like wider audience. And so yeah, and even with that lineup, it was trying to create this kind of storyline of like bass music. But even when I was doing that, it was the same way that I look at a collection, you know, like what are those foundation parts? Like how do we build this from the start and how do we want to end? And what is the message? So I guess the same way how I approached that, like, you know, music festival takeover stage was similar. I guess that kind of goes back to my point. It's like if the story and the feeling and the vision is like clear, like this is what I'm trying to say, these are the artists what I want to work with, or this is the collection storyline, this is the fabric we're pushing, this is what we've developed. You know, everything we wait within our range is like the jacquard for Sacred Drums. That was like a bespoke jacquard we had produced in France with like sound wave kind of feelings to it, you know, taking reference of these like drum patterns. The tartan was bespoke. The Japanese check we developed from scratch. And it's the same way when I like to build some other elements, is like trying to make it as like specific as I can. So it really has a sense of like where like the message needs to go. So I think both of those is kind of what I always try and push for, is just like trying to be as clear as possible, which is really hard.
Taking a brief break from the pod to introduce you to the second sponsor of this episode. It is TurntableLab.com, who is the home for everything that you would need as a hi-fi enthusiast, a beginner or record collector. It is the one-stop shop for everything that you need in terms of hi-fi. Whether it's the little brushes that you need to take the dust off, whether it's vinyl, weights, whether you need an adapter to play 45s, anything you can think of, speaker cables, speakers, turntables, it's all there. It is Turntable Lab, of course. And I just peruse the virtual shells and dream about the things that I want or need. You can also check out their 100,000 plus records, so you can rifle through and not get dusty fingers as you do it, and discover all of your favorite reissues or albums that you didn't know were even on vinyl. And you can take advantage of the 4 or more deal, where if you buy 4 or more records, you get 10% off, which is like saving you postage at the very least. So head to TurntableLab.com, or you can go to TurntableLab.com/G to check out some of my selections, recommendations, and things that I own to get you started on your next obsession. All right, back to the episode. There's not many menswear designers that are curating and hosting stages at festivals.
Yeah.
And I do think about like, not sure if I should say it like this, but like a post-Virgil world where Virgil was like DJing and had a radio show and was opening at festivals, playing at festivals, and being that person that was like, wait, you can design furniture, you can design clothes, and you exist in that world where When you talked earlier about collections inspired by spiritual jazz or something, a genre that I connect with a lot, you don't hear that sort of story being told in fashion so much. You hear about like, oh, it's a comment on consumerism and dystopia, and this is like Sun Ra, hell yeah. Do you feel like that well is always going to be there for you, or do you want to explore things outside of sound, or is that just baked into the brand of how music inspires you to create?
Well, literally, my last moment was still very much in the spiritual jazz world. Well, not spiritual jazz, but definitely in the more spiritual zone. So Paris Fashion Week, Festival de la Musique, it's the day in the city where the whole city erupts. There is this thing now where obviously a lot of fashion brands, including myself, have a moment during Fashion Week on a day which is primarily started as like a music street festival for the people by the people. Now there's obviously this context that bigger brands are coming in doing bigger moments. You know, there was Boiler Room was doing something, NTS was doing something, which is great because like when there's so much great music, it is amazing. The energy during Paris Fashion Week on that day is insane. Like so many amazing people coming over, so many people playing. So I know it's very noisy. So I was like, I'm going to give the opposite to this. And I asked Nala Sonemfro to play,
Oh,
who's
wow.
an incredible artist. I'm sure you've listened to her work. And I just felt like right now we need sonics of healing and this like sense of like, you know, this last few months or this last year, you know, when I found things really difficult or challenging, you know, one of the albums I always went to was Nala's because I feel there's something very very deep, very therapeutic, but also there's also this sense of like, I don't know, like exploration within her work, within her soundscapes. I don't know, it's hard to put this idea of like optimism maybe in there or like this celestial kind of, I don't know, I'm still trying to figure out. I was trying to chat to Nala about it. She's like, it's great, you like it. You don't need to like you don't need to like tell me all these things. But that was incredible. And it was in the Oscar Neymar space in Paris, which was built it was like a post-Soviet building. Amazing. It was like in a dome with this amazing green floor and the acoustics were incredible. It only fitted around 250 people, but it was amazing. Like everyone was on the floor. Like I told everyone just to relax and chill. I don't know, as a designer, it's the best thing to have GQ magazine and buyers, you know, lying down, closing their eyes. It's like them seeing clothes and trying to, you know, sell the dream to them. I was like, nah, everyone just like, this is meant to be a moment where we're going to just like, you know, hear some healing sounds and, you know, appreciate that like a moment of like, not stillness, but just really kind of zone into it. And I guess that could only really come from maybe someone who is maybe more in tuned with maybe a deeper sonic interest. Obviously, we still style the band and we made Nala a whole bespoke outfit. We made this like kimono top with this wide leg trouser. Dwayne was wearing like our bomber jacket. Eddie, we did another big hat with some cowrie shells. So they still look great. You know, that's obviously always, you know, fashion is still my kind of origin of kind of about. Even on that day where I knew it was going to be busy, very DJ heavy, I felt it was important also to have a space where within the world and the politics and the situations like globally, I was like, that's for me has been really helpful just to have like, or introduce someone to that, to Nala's music, which might also give them some other joy, sort of this sonic healing sound bath.
And I think what you said about authenticity makes so much sense, that a lot of these bigger fashion houses have music, but it feels like it's like, how can we curate the coolest thing?
Yeah.
And how can we find those things where you're like, I want to portray a message and a feeling, and I know who that is, and I'm going to choose that. Because you've mentioned so many incredible DJs and artists, I did want to ask you about London. What is it about London? Do you think this brand could exist without London?
Ooh, that's a good question. I grew up in the Midlands. You know, I chose to come to London for a couple of reasons. You know, one, to go to St. Martin's because I knew that was one of the most like, you know, prestigious fashion courses to go on. And I was like, you know, you want to be with the best, like you want to like push yourself and like be in a place where you feel you can really creatively grow. And also, obviously, we've got loads of family in London, like in Brixton and Croydon, where there's such a heavy, long history of the British Caribbean community. So I've always been exposed to it. and always had like an affinity, whether it's Notting Hill Carnival or meeting family and friends and other places or art institutions or cultural spaces, or gigs and venues. So I feel like there's always been trips to the city. It was always bringing me back. I guess naturally it was inevitable that I was going to move here, to study. And obviously, as I've kind of gone through already, I've met my wife here, I got married here. The brand's been positioned here, supported by like the British Fashion Council. Now it's amazing to have worked with different institutions, whether it's, the V&A, Somerset House, the South Bank Centre, so many different venues and spaces and places which I've managed to infiltrate or to explore or to bring my world into. And then I guess all of that comes down to the community which is here. And I think that is something which is really, really special about London. And I think not just now, but historically, like how long different communities have lived here, from around the world for over hundreds and hundreds of years, continue to build this narrative and this history about the city. And it's quite interesting, like, Nabi and my wife did this really amazing project around the Thames and the water, and like taking field recordings and some amazing visuals with another artist, looking at the history of the River Thames and how that has also affected the city and like music and trade and culture. And I feel like almost in a way through like fashion or sound, it is this like ever flowing, ever changing or meandering into like different spaces. And I feel that's the reason maybe why so many artists and creatives have work here, live here, and it has produced such iconic moments. Why did Bob Marley come here, from Jamaica, with Exodus? Jimi Hendrix spends so much time here, obviously unfortunately passed away here. And I think also in a way with fashion, Savile Row, in quote, the birthplace of modern menswear in terms of like, a three-piece suit. It's had like Marcus Garvey to Selassie to Prince Charles to James Bond, and I guess that street, even in the context of fashion, it's not really a street which you can find elsewhere in the world. It is very British and very London, I guess, in terms of like how that's been built. And I think you can also look at that within how many different cultural movements, whether it's new romantics, punks, grime, sound system culture, and I guess this kind of like in quote new jazz vanguard with Shabaka and Nabaya and Youssef and some of the people who I've mentioned. That's why like when you go to LA, not having like public transport, like even the tube, it sounds crazy, but just even having the underground, in terms of just having public transport or the underground, where people are in a same space, maybe from different worlds, different spaces, different classes. I mean, there's so much to do with it, even within like a cultural kind of infrastructure sense, which I think is also adds into like the palette of how this city's built and kind of what it's been through. So yeah, I feel fortunate that I'm here, and I think some of it is an accumulation of this being such a hub of different minds and kind of cultural importance. And obviously it's amazing again whenever there is a sort of movement, like even with the elections which have just come out and the rollout within the UK, or what's happening in Gaza as well, it's like this city always comes out.
That explains absolutely everything. I think that's the perfect way to end. But I think you said it finds a way to express itself. And I think that you, Nicholas Daley, represent that really exciting future. And it's funny because I think a lot of people might look at brands, more obviously futuristic quote unquote brands that might be all decked out in chrome and latex and be like, wow, futuristic. But I feel like what you bring to the table is a unity and a spirituality and a soulfulness and a connectiveness and that sense of community and culture that is far more futuristic. It's got a richness of culture and of storytelling. What you said about London, I think you could say about yourself and about what you do and how you build your brand, but also build the people around you and give those opportunities to others as well. I think with that, Nicholas Daley, I really appreciate you for coming on, and I really think that people are going to enjoy this insight and conversation because you bring so much to the table that I think is only going to reverberate more and more as you continue your craft.
Oh, thank you, man. It's been great to sit down and kind of talk about it, because this is healthy as well, speaking to yourself, Derrick, about the brand, and also coming up to next year where it is going to be like a sort of mini milestone. It's like, okay, well, this is what I believe and these are the people who I worked with. And it's great that, you know, people like yourself who have a really good eye, you know, in terms of music and culture. And obviously, hopefully now with your family and, you know, the ideas of duality with heritage, it's like really important to have people like yourself as well to be spotlighting, because that's kind of what I feel I've been doing, spotlighting different artists, different places, different sound palettes, people who've inspired me, you know, cross-generational, all of that. And I feel like we kind of need more creatives or curatorial people who are able to spotlight really great things and important things in a time where it does feel quite noisy. No, thank you for having me on the show and for speaking some truths about what I've been trying to grow with the brand. So thank you.
Thank you. That is very, very kind. Thank you again for everyone for listening. And that was the episode. Nicholas Daley Speaks Volumes. Thank you, Nicholas.
No problem.
That was the second last episode of Speaks Volumes featuring Nicholas Daley. Thank you so much for hanging around. Thank you so much for listening. If you liked this episode, please give it a star rating on your app of choice, or a thumbs up, or a subscription, or wherever you may be. This podcast was produced by Julia Wang. The branding and design was designed by Jonny Sikov. And if you want to hang out with me more, you can find me on Patreon, where I put out a weekly radio show called Solid Air. Thank you so much for listening. One more episode to go. Willow Peron next week. See you then.